All right, let me adjust this a little bit. Kind of like that, I guess. That should work. Let's move this over here, maybe. There we go. That's kind of okay. And we're good on audio. Looks like. Are we? Okay, I think everything's set up right. I think we're good. Whoops, let me get this out of here. Okay, welcome on in, everybody. I know I was a couple minutes behind. I mean, it was before 10, but I usually try to get the streams up about 5 till. The Zoom meeting is usually opened up earlier because I have office hours before this class. But I try to get the Zoom and the YouTube stream set up about 5 till. So that way people can kind of come in. I was a little late today, which I didn't get it up till like 9:57 or something. And I know when I don't get that full 5 minutes ahead of time, it takes people a little longer to kind of find their way into the stream. So I try to have it up about when I see it's about 5 till. I try to start both streams up so people can kind of come in and get ready. So I'll leave a few more minutes before I take roll because, again, super important right now to be taking roll. Let me turn this sound effect off in Zoom. We don't keep hearing that chime. And again, you're welcome to consume these meetings whichever way you want, the Zoom meeting, the YouTube stream. Again, I will remind you, there is a tendency for some people, especially as the semester goes on and we're all getting tired and you got lots of stuff going on, for people to start not showing up. Oh, yep, thanks. I have the date wrong in the thing. Thanks for pointing that out, Flora. For people to stop showing up to the live meetings, and I highly don't recommend it. There is a very, very clear-cut difference in grades between the students who have been attending the meetings and the students who don't. And you know, one of the things about being a student, is that you look at the things that like people are doing. You try to model yourself after the people who are doing well in school, and then avoid doing the things that people do poorly in school, right? So anytime you see a clear-cut difference, and there's a bunch of them, there's lots of things that make a clear-cut difference, especially in a math class. But if you see, of the group of students who show up to the live to the meetings, they get this grade, and then they do well and they pass the class, and then the students who watch it later have a very low pass rate. Well, which group do you want to be in, right? You want to give yourself as a student every opportunity to be successful. So you want to do the things that the successful people are doing, right? There's a reason that those people pass courses and get better grades. And it's easy, especially the way our culture views, we're in a very anti-intellectual culture, anti-facts, anti-reason and logic and stuff like that. So it's very easy to not understand how things work and go, well, that person's just smart. That's why they're passing. And the reality is, as a professor, I would even challenge, what does smart even mean? We sort of throw that word around. What does it mean for a student to be smart? I will tell you, so much of being successful in school doesn't come down to quote unquote smart or not smart. It comes down to doing the right things, having the right habits, and putting in the work. So you want to make those choices as a student that put you in the higher success category. You don't want to do the things that put you in the lower success category. And one of those things is showing up to those meetings, right? And I know I'm talking to the wrong group because if you're here, that means you're at the live meeting. But there will be people who watch this later, and hopefully I can and sometimes people have to watch it later for legitimate reasons, right? So sometimes you got stuff going on. But I would highly encourage you to try as much as you can to show up to most of the live meetings. If, all the meetings that you can show up to, please do, because being here live, being able to ask questions, forming those groups, that kind of stuff is going to help you in this course. And it looks like someone pointed out that I apparently don't know what year it is. So thanks for pointing that out. Let me go through. Let's see. I should be able to fix this on the fly here. There we go. Should save now. Okay, great. Okay, so we are going to be getting into it. I'll wait a few more minutes, maybe 5, 10 more minutes before I take roll. It just makes it easier when there's people coming in late, um, that we have to make sure I get that roll proper so that so that I don't drop people who shouldn't be dropped, right? Okay, so getting into, um, let's see. I don't think I looked it over before class. I don't think there's anything specifically I have to mention. Just remember, if you don't have your homework set up, get on that. You get a 14-day free trial no matter what. And then on top of that, if you work through the VC bookstore, they get you the license for the full semester for free. I have not had any emails yet this semester telling me that there are problems acquiring that. Sometimes there's hiccups with the bookstore. A couple of my other classes, I had huge major headaches with the bookstore because the bookstore claims that their files got messed up during a software update. I don't know. I guess I'll trust them on that. But so far in this class, everything seems to be running smooth. They do at some point into the semester, like there's kind of two problems. There's two issues with waiting to take care of this book stuff. One is that you're getting behind in the class, so that's obviously not good. That's one of those things like, do you want to be in the successful category or the unsuccessful group of people? The ones who don't get behind have a higher rate of passing the class, right? That's a good way to really kind of shoot yourself in the foot, as far as the class is to get behind, and it's difficult in math classes to catch up. But the other thing is the bookstore eventually sends stuff back to the vendor and gets refunds for the stuff that didn't sell. So it is possible if you wait long enough, and every once in a while there's a student who does this, you wait, 4-6 weeks in, you go to the bookstore and they're like, we sent all those back. We don't have it stocked in the bookstore anymore. So you don't want to wait. Just get on top of it and get that taken care of. So we got a question here about the book. So the book, the actual physical, let's see, I got a book. Is that the same thing, or do I have to ask for something else? You need the license. They should be giving you the license to do the homework. So there should be a code. Sometimes it comes with a cardboard, a piece of cardboard that has a code on it. That's what you want in order to be able to do the homework. If you've done it that way, and everything should line up. So you want to make sure that you have that. If you have any questions, feel free to stick around after class, and I can take a closer look at it with you, and we can sort of verify that you have the right stuff. Okay. But I'd have to see specifically what you have. But the main thing that's required for the course is the license that does for you to do the homework, and that should have come with the book. If they did everything okay, then that should have come with that. Let me make a note here for something I want to check. Okay, just adding to my to-do list of things I need to get done today. Yeah, so someone was saying that they did it in person and it was super easy. You just go there and tell them, yep, that looks, I think, it's hard to tell immediately, but yeah, that's like what I don't know if you're in Zoom, you can see someone showing me that access code card. That's what you want. That gets you, that should be the right thing. That looks like there's a million versions of those, but if they sold you that through the bookstore, then 99.9% chance that's the right thing, and then you'll use that to set up the homework, and then you're good to go. Okay? Yeah, great. You should be good to go then. Thanks, Omar. Okay. So, yeah. So if you're on YouTube, you may not have heard. There was a question in Zoom about doing that. So if you just take your schedule, or even just the information for your schedule to the bookstore. So basically, they want to know you're teaching Math 40 or you're taking Math 44 statistics. Tell them my name, and then if you give them the CRN, that's on your schedule. That because there's a bunch of different stats classes. So how they tell the difference is both by the instructor and then the CRN. So if you just print out your schedule or pull it up on your phone or something and show them, they'll know exactly what product to give you. So, yeah. So that's great. Make sure you're taking care of that. We are in week 2 here, so you definitely want to be getting that taken care of, so that you're not. Otherwise, you're going to find yourself in a position where you don't even have access to the homework, and then obviously that's going to lead to getting behind. So I would highly encourage you to take care of that. And I know not everyone in class has done that yet, but I would encourage you to anyone who hasn't yet, take care of that. Okay, looks like a good time. I should be able to take roll now, so let me take a look. What are we? We're in Wednesday of week 2. Okay, what do we got? Go window. Okay, looks like a good time. I should be able. You cut out. Was there a question? I think someone was asking a question, but then they got cut off. So feel free to repeat your question. If you're in this YouTube stream, go ahead and you don't have to put your last name up, but put the first letter of your last name and your first name so I can just identify if you're in here or not. So it says we have 10 people in there, but I'm seeing, oh, Daniel H. Okay. Okay, so let's see. Great. Okay, so let me go through the people that I am missing, either because you didn't put your name up there or because for whatever reason. So we got Jose A, Willie D. Willie D hasn't been attending, so if you're here, you definitely want to let me know, or you're in danger of getting dropped. Okay, Brianna V. Okay, let's see. We've got. Wait, I thought I marked this person here. Yeah, we got this person's here. Let's see, Luis L. Not, I don't have you marked. Thade M. And Francesca P. So if anybody whose name I said is in here, you need to let me know. Otherwise, you're going to get marked as not being here. And then remember, in a few weeks here, I have to drop people who are not attending or are not participating. Either one. We can justify it with this person's not showing up to class. We can justify it with this person's not doing any homework. Either way, we're supposed to drop you. So if you're doing one but not the other, supposed to drop you. Oh, by the way, watch your emails. Like, I don't want to give out specific information yet because it's still sort of forming, but we were informed this morning that they are starting the process of extending further the online portion of this class. So we will not be originally, I think it was, I forget what the date was, but I think it was the first 2 weeks of school we were supposed to be online. Well, that's this week. So it's looking like we will not be on campus next week. I don't know if an official email has been sent out to students, and I don't want to say too much because I don't want to say anything that then turns out they changed their mind. And then, so I'll just wait for the official email to come out, which will come out to students soon, I imagine. And so that's a little bit more time before we're meeting in person, right? So we'll be working online, which I kind of suspected was going to happen. Do be preparing for when we go back online, though. The school is not expecting for us to be online the entire semester, right? I think there's a pretty good expectation that this is the last extension they will be giving of the online part of this course. That is, there's a pretty, they kind of suspected even early on that they were going to extend this period where we're online again, but there's a pretty strong feeling at the moment among the people who make these decisions that the extension they just gave will be the end. And when that date expires, we will be back in the classroom, right? I think unless something really unexpected goes on with the virus, we are expected to be back on the date that they're going to email you shortly. And I know it sounds weird that I'm avoiding saying anything, but again, like, I want the official email that goes out to be the thing that we all rely on, not like stuff they've kind of told us unofficially. So keep that in mind. If you are not ready to come on campus, that is, you have not submitted your vaccine card to the school, I would get on top of that. So if you're planning to get vaccinated but haven't done it yet, get your vaccinations. If you have not submitted your vaccine card, do it now. Do it now where they have the time to like process your card, not where they're looking at 2,500 cards a day or something that they're just not going to be able to keep up with, because it doesn't matter what the excuse is. If you don't have that bracelet on your arm that says you went through the screening process, you cannot be in the classroom. There's no explanations. There's no, oh, well, I tried to, but this happens. If you do not have that wrist bracelet on and a mask on, I literally, like, that's our rule. I have to tell you to leave. And if you don't leave, I have to cancel class. So, which is bad for everyone, because then we're not getting the guidance that we need to successfully pass the class. So please make sure you're taking care of that stuff now rather than waiting till later. Okay, and watch for that email. I imagine it will be out. If it's not out already, I imagine it will be out shortly, giving you the exact details and dates for the semester. Okay. All right. With that said, let's see, we've got all those things out of the way. Let's move ahead with actual statistics. So we talked last time, we kind of started the discussion about statistics and what it is and what the different considerations are for statistics. We talked about it's a lot more complicated than people think to run a survey, right? There's all sorts of biases, right? Imagine if you just said, well, I've asked all my friends this and they all agree with me, so that's what everybody thinks. Well, your friends are a pretty self-selected group. You've literally selected them to be your friends, and so there's a good chance that a lot of them think the same way, right? Same with families. Everyone in my family thinks this, so that's what everybody thinks, right? Well, no, you're selecting for a group of people, and you have to be careful about that. So we talked about websites. It's real easy to take an internet poll. You just throw a poll up on a website, but internet polls are essentially useless, right? There's this balance between how easy it is to collect information and the validity of that information. And almost always, if you're following good statistical procedures that will stand up to scrutiny, it's hard to collect data, right? Even the way we're doing it in this class when we run our projects here wouldn't hold up to scrutiny, right? We're doing this as a learning exercise for you to go through the steps and learn every step of the process of conducting statistics. But the work we do in this class isn't like publishable or anything, because there are certain things we're not doing, like randomization. Number one thing that you should be putting in when you select who you're going to ask questions to is randomizing things. This is hard to do sometimes, right? Like in our class, we've selected the people in the class are the ones taking the survey. That would be the first criticism that people would have. If this was like publishable work, people would say, well, that wasn't randomized at all. Why didn't you randomize things? And they would be right? So we're selecting for people who signed up for an on-ground statistics class. That's a special group of people. It doesn't necessarily include all walks of life, right? And that's what you get with the randomization. So just always keep that in mind, right? And I'm not trying to cut down our own work we're going to do on our projects, but remember, the project is a learning experience. It's not like, you're not going to go publish this in work in a journal or something like that. So, and just as a reminder, you should be working on the lessons and the assessments, working your way through those. And if you have questions, come see me about it. Okay. So we talked a little bit before about, asking questions and the difficulty that you get with asking questions, and how sometimes you can ask the same question on the same survey of the same people, but you ask the question in two different ways and you get very different answers, right? So you have to be very careful about how you go through and do those things. So, and what I will say is, especially now when we're online, the information I'm giving you is not always going to perfectly line up with the lesson that you're working on at that moment. But a lot of it is I'm trying to work maybe a little bit ahead sometimes, but I'm also trying to fill in the gaps of the lessons that when you do the online lesson and the online homework. I'm trying to fill in more information to really kind of give you the full picture of how the statistics works. Because remember, there's two aspects to this course. There's the mechanics, which luckily most of it gets done by StatCrunch, right? So you don't have to, like when I was a student, we had to, they'd make us calculate a regression by hand. We still had like calculators and software that could do it for us, but they'd still make you do it by hand. No one really does that anymore. You just go to StatCrunch and you have StatCrunch calculate it for you. But you need to know how to get StatCrunch to calculate it for you. And most importantly, I would argue most importantly, you need to know what it means. You need to be able to interpret it, okay? It's very important in your videos that you turn in at the end of the semester that you're not just reading an output from StatCrunch. Anyone can do that. I can hand someone a piece of paper that was a printed StatCrunch screen, and they can just read it and have no idea what it means. I could give, a third grader a print screen and they can read it. That doesn't mean that they have any idea or understanding of what they're reading. So it's really important that you have those concepts along the way, that you understand what we're talking about. Because the calculations, right, some people would disagree with me, but more and more we're moving this direction. The calculations are not that important because you're not doing calculations. StatCrunch is doing calculations, right? You're valuable because you can interpret and understand and act on the information coming out of StatCrunch, okay? Now, here in the beginning, there is lots of definitions that we need to talk about, and stop me if we did, but I don't believe we talked about any definitions last time. Maybe a couple, but I think some of them actually should be repeated. But we're going to go over some information here. The definitions are very important, and I know it's so boring in a class when you have to learn what a bunch of new words mean. Here's your definitions, right? I remember taking a class in high school. It was political science in high school. And every Monday, the teacher would start off by putting 20 definitions. He would project them onto the board, and we had to write down these 20 definitions, and it was mind-numbing, right? Political science is actually super fascinating, but the way that class was taught, ruined the whole subject, right? Because it was so boring. But what I will say is, not understanding the definitions in this class mean that you're not going to really understand what we're doing. A lot of times people kind of stumble through without knowing things, but they make lots of mistakes because they don't know the difference between a population and a sample, right? We have to throw different tools at different situations, and if you don't understand the vocabulary of statistics, you won't understand when to use which tool. And, I have students coming to me. There's one homework section in particular. I'll have to try to remember which one it is, but they come to me and they're like, I'm calculating the standard deviation and it keeps telling me I'm wrong, and I don't understand why I'm wrong because it worked on the previous problem and I'm doing the same thing on this problem and it's not working. And then we look at it and, well, that's because in the previous problem you were doing the standard deviation for a sample. This problem is telling you it wants the standard deviation for a population. Well, since you don't know the difference, you're not sure which one to use when. Right? That's the difficulty. So it really is important to understand these. The good news is most of them aren't really difficult definitions, right? And I'm not telling you to go write each definition 5 times or anything like that. Most of these definitions, if you kind of work at it a little bit, will make sense to you pretty quickly, and it will definitely give you a much deeper understanding of the statistics that we're looking at. So first of all, data. Data are collections of observations, measurements, genders, survey responses, all sorts of stuff. Data can take many, many forms, but it's just collection of observations that we've collected, right? This could be I've used the example. I think I used last week the example because we literally did this on campus when we want to know what are the students' opinions about a smoking ban. Do students support a smoking ban? Do students support a partial smoking ban? Do students think that we should have areas where people can go smoke on campus, right? We wanted to know what people thought about that, so we collected that information from the students. That's data. You can get data from surveys. That's kind of what you're doing for your project. You're going to ask people questions, and you're going to collect data on it. Data can be done other ways on non-humans, right? I went to a talk once at a math conference. It was a mathematical teaching conference. Was there, and the person was giving a talk on those red light cameras and how those red light cameras, it's a pretty sketchy business overall. There's lots of information. You can look this up, but it's fairly sketchy the way they do things with those red light cameras to actually increase revenue, right? They want to give more tickets so that they can collect more money because they get money on those, especially when it's a private company kind of running the thing because the private company wants to make money, the city wants to make money. So they do things like shortening the yellow light at a red light camera so that more people will end up missing the light. You're used to yellow lights being a certain amount of time, but then they shorten it in some areas. You're more likely to get a red light, and then you get a ticket in the mail, right? So I went to a talk where the person went around his city because he suspected this kind of nefarious stuff was going on, and he went around and he timed the yellow lights around the city, and there was, he used statistics to prove there was very clear evidence that the lights that had the red light cameras on them had shortened yellow light times versus the ones that weren't had longer yellow light times, right? Which is, not great. Let's see. Okay, let me get. Okay, thanks, Francesca. I got you. So your data can be purely observational. You just watch something happen, or it can be more intrusive is not really the type of word, but where you're intervening and you're asking someone a question, right? We'll talk about that in a few minutes, the difference between those two types of things. So data, you're just collecting information. Statistics, we should know what statistics are because that's what this class is called, right? Introduction to Statistics. Statistics is the science of planning studies and experiments, obtaining data, and then organizing, summarizing, presenting, analyzing, interpreting, and drawing conclusions based on that data. There's a lot in that sentence, right? First of all, there's just a lot of words in that sentence, but when you break it down, each one of those words is like a chapter in the book. So, planning studies and experiments. Well, first of all, what's a study and what's an experiment? What are the differences between those? And then how do you plan them properly? That's basically a major topic. How do you obtain your data? That's a major topic. How do you organize, summarize, and present your data? Those are all three big topics. Presenting your data properly, important. Analyzing, that's a huge portion of what we do. Interpreting, I've kind of mentioned, that's one of the big ones, right? If StatCrunch can crunch numbers, but you don't really understand what they mean, then what's the point? Why are we even here? And then drawing conclusions, right? That's ultimately what people want. No one, unless you become a professional statistician and you're publishing papers, no one cares about the stats work that you do. They just want a conclusion, right? If you have a job and you have to do statistics from time to time for your job, your boss doesn't want to hear about all the work you did. They just want to know the conclusion. What's the decision? Are we making choice A or are we making choice B? What's the better business decision? And that's really all they want to know. Now, if you're becoming a researcher, because you're going to do research, that's great. You're going to have to understand statistics so that you can use statistics properly in your research. So, and in that case, people may be reading your statistics, right, to make sure that your research is being done properly. So that's a definition that basically, we'll be learning what this definition means for the entire semester. Okay, we read this right now. When we read this again in 18 weeks, you're going to have a much deeper understanding of what that sentence actually means. Okay, this is a big one. A lot of times people take these early definitions for granted, but you will, almost every problem in this that you do in this class, you're going to have to stop and you ask yourself, Is this a population or is this a sample? So we want to make sure we know those. A population is the complete collection of all individuals, scores, people, measurements, and so on to be studied. The collection is complete in the sense that it includes all of the individuals to be studied. So whatever you're looking at, like you're trying to decide a certain thing, right? So we might be interested in learning about U.S. citizens. Then the population is every U.S. citizen. Whether we talk to them or not as part of our statistical work, the population is U.S. citizens. We might be talking about Ventura College students. Then the population is every single Ventura College student, right? We might be talking about female Ventura College students. In that case, the population is every single female Ventura College student. So see how you're picking a group that you want to study. Everything or person, whatever it is, that fits in that category is part of the population. And that's ultimately what we want to know about when we're studying something, right? When we wanted to know the preferences for a tobacco ban of students, we really wanted to know about every single Ventura College student. We just didn't say, well, we only want to know what some of the students think. Our goal is really to, when we come to our meetings and say, yeah, we think that 80% of Ventura College students support a full tobacco ban. We have to be able to say that. Well, we can't ask every single Ventura College student what they think. It's, it's kind of overkill, and plus that would be incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to do. So then what we do is we look at what's called a sample. A sample is a sub-collection of members selected from a population. So a population is the whole group you're studying. A sample is a subgroup of that. So when we did our work with the tobacco ban, we did not ask every single Ventura College student. That would be way too hard to do. What we did is we asked a subgroup. That's what we call a sample. And that's how statistics works. You generally want to know information about the whole population, the entire group that you're trying to study, but it's almost impossible to collect data on every member of a population. That's usually very difficult. So what you do is you strategically collect, you create a sample, which is a sub-collection. So for instance, if we wanted to know, I don't remember exactly what process was followed because I didn't conduct the survey, so I'm making this up, but here's what you would do. We want to know what percentage of Ventura College students support a full tobacco ban, right? This was whatever we did this 5 years ago. Okay, well, we can't ask all 10,000 students because, if we sent an email to every single student, we would only get some people responding, and then you get into all sorts of issues. So what you do is you could say, all right, let's randomly select 200 school ID numbers for students, and then we'll just track down those students and we'll ask them if they support a tobacco ban. So in that case, the population was every Ventura College student, and that's ultimately what we want to know about. We want to know about the whole population, but we don't have enough time and energy or even the ability to ask every student. So we look at a sample of 200 randomly selected students and we talk to them. And we hope if we do everything well, then the outcomes we get with our sample is representative of the population. So if we choose our sample well of students at Ventura College, and we get that they say 80% of the sample supports a full tobacco ban, then if we've done our work, we should be able to say, yeah, we have reason to believe that in the neighborhood of 80% of the population of Ventura College students support a full tobacco ban. Right? That's the idea. We almost always work with a sample, but we use that to gain information about the population. Okay? So it's really important that you know the difference, because there are things like I kind of mentioned, standard deviation. The calculation to calculate the standard deviation for a sample is a different formula. It's close, but it's a different formula than the population. So if you're doing a homework problem and they're asking about the sample and use the sample standard deviation, then you're good to go. If you're doing a problem and they ask about the population and use the sample standard deviation, you're going to keep getting it wrong. And you're going to be close. You're going to go, why is my number keeping a little bit off? It's because you're using the wrong tool for that job. So you got to make sure you understand them. Let's see. We've got a question here. Yes, you should start the so the question is, we can start the lessons and assessments right now, right? I mean, I would say wait till after class. But yeah, you can, those lessons and everything should be live and working for you. So when class is completed, feel free to dive into that stuff. Okay? Let's see. A census. A census is the collection of data from every member of the population. You go, well, that sounds great, because then you're getting every single person's feedback. It's almost impossible to do this. Okay, it's very, very difficult, because just think about Ventura College. How would we ask every single student if they support the tobacco ban? I mean, think of all the different groups of students. We have, even at Ventura College, we have 2 campuses. So we have students out in Santa Paula. We have students here in Ventura. Okay, so now we have to figure out how to get information from 2 groups. Okay. Well, how are we even going to get that information? Are we going to send out an email? I will tell you, as a professor at Ventura College, a large number of students don't even know that they have a school email, and even fewer of you ever check your school email. So sending out an email isn't really going to work. And even if you got that email, how many of you are going to sit there and respond? Not very many. Okay, you say, well, why don't we just check with people in class? Okay, well, we could get a lot of responses if in class I make everyone respond, but what if you're absent that day? Or what if I put it on Canvas and you just don't do that assignment, right? So you can see it's actually very difficult to do a census and get every single individual. And the reality is, most of the time we don't have to. If we take a good sample and we use good statistical tools, then our work should be representative of the population, which will be cheaper and easier to do, and we still get at least close to the information that we want, right? I mean, you have to think about what's an important difference. Let's say, Colin, I'm having an issue with my roll, so why don't you talk to me towards the end of class? So I want just check with me. I got to make sure my roll's right. So check with me after class. Right. Oh, so important differences, right? So when we're doing the tobacco ban, when we're asking students about how many of you support the tobacco ban, does it really make a difference whether 80% of students support a tobacco ban or 81% of students make a tobacco ban? Probably not. So in that case, you could say that that difference is not that important, right? Because it didn't really, it's not going to change our decision and go, oh, we thought 80% supported it, but it's actually 81. Let's change everything. But it might make a difference if 40% support a tobacco ban versus 80% support a tobacco ban. So that's kind of a level you need to think about too, is like, what is the level of importance of the statistics that we're doing, okay? Census, the census that you're probably most familiar with is every 10 years, our country is supposed to go around and count every citizen, right? And if you follow politics, you'll realize there was a lot of controversy in the, the census is supposed to count every person in the United States, right? There was some controversy when they did the census where they wanted to argue, oh no, we're only supposed to count citizens. That's not what the Constitution says. The Constitution says you're supposed to count people. But, unfortunately, things like the census have become very politicized. And so you have, people trying to work their politics into a thing like the census and then affect the outcomes based on how you collect the data, right? Going in there and saying, oh, we're only going to count citizens, you're going to get very different outcomes than if you count human beings, right? And, the Constitution says you got to count people. It doesn't say citizens. So you can see, right, and this is one reason to understand statistics, a lot of the work that the things that you hear about going on in the news and politics is really to affects stuff like this. You might think, what's the big deal between counting citizens versus counting people? It's a big deal, and that's why people fight cases all the way to the Supreme Court, because it makes a big deal in what they want outcomes to be. So it's important to understand these things. Okay, a couple things. Sample data must be collected in an appropriate way. Yes, if you do not collect your sample data in an appropriate way, it's essentially meaningless. And that also almost always means some type of random selection. Should be a randomization going on in that process. If you aren't randomizing things, that means even unintentionally, and you may not even realize you're doing this, but you're probably selecting certain groups of people. And if you do that, that means you're leaving out certain groups of people, and that means that your data is not really reflective of the entire population. Just like if I go stand out at the parking lot and people coming in and I ask them a question and I write down their responses, well, I'm leaving out all the online people. I'm leaving out all the bus riders. And those are important groups that they might have a shared point of view, and we're completely leaving out that point of view by not including those people in our survey. It would be much better to go to the school and say, give me 500 randomized students. Just it's easy to write a little program that randomly selects 500 ID numbers. Then, okay, I've got my 500 students. I'm going to track these people down and ask them a question. And then if you do it that way, you're going to get online students. You're going to get students who ride the bus, students who ride their bike, students who ride the car, students who are full-time, students who are part-time, students who work, students who don't work, older students, young students. We have 14 students as young as 14 at the college. Your typical 18 to 20-year-old students. You're going to get a mix of everybody, across cultural and racial lines. You're going to get everybody mixed in there. And that's if you're trying to figure out what Ventura College students think, you want to include everybody. You want everybody included in that. You don't want to be taking a whole group and saying, oh, well, we didn't reach this group, right? So that randomization usually takes care of that. Okay. If sample data are not collected in an appropriate way, the data may be so completely useless that no amount of statistical torturing can salvage them. Some of you will do this with your questions for your survey. Some of you will not quite understand how to ask good statistical questions when we get to that point in the class, or talk about it, and we've already talked a little bit about it, and we'll talk more. I'll give you some hints before you turn in your official questions. But, every time I've done this, there's at least one group that asks at least one terrible question, and the data is pointless. It's unusable, because you can't go back and change. Like, sometimes you can take the data that you've collected and you can fix it. Like, I think I gave the example last time of height. If you ask people, what's your height, and they answer, in not inconsistent ways, you can usually figure out what they were trying to say, and then you can change the data, not to change the content, but make it fit the rest of the data. So, if you wanted inches, then when the person says 5'8", you can change that to 68 inches, right? There's nothing wrong with doing that. But if you ask people a question and they don't understand, sometimes the answers are so bad that you can't fix them, that you just have to throw that question out and go, I guess we can't use this one, right? So that's important. A lot of people don't realize how much work has to go in before you even ask somebody a question or make an observation. You have to have done statistics to make sure you're doing that properly, or it doesn't matter what you do later. If your data is a mess, sometimes you just can't fix it. So it's really important. Things to consider: context of the data, source of the data, and the sampling method. Context of the data is just sort of the full picture. Do you know the full picture under which this data was collected? It's very important. Source of the data, right? How much faith are you going to have in smoking statistics that were released by smoking companies? How much faith are you going to have? How much trust are you going to have in climate data released by oil companies? Probably not very much. Those groups have a financial interest in making you think a certain way. So you're not going to trust that data very much, right? And then the sampling method. Was this sampling conducted in a way that is mathematically proper, or was it done in a lazy, ineffective method and we should throw out the we should throw out that data, right? And then we have conclusions and practical implications. Those are all things we have to consider, right? Conclusions, hugely important. We're going to be learning about all that all semester. And then the practical implications, can you actually use this, right? I think there's an example in this book where they talk about there was a drug that you could take that supposedly would increase the likelihood of you having, I forget if it would increase you having a male child or a female child or something like that. Like it would help determine if you were more likely to have a boy or girl. But it was like a 1% difference is what they found statistically. So like, you know, theoretically it's 50% that you'd have a boy, 50% that you'd have a girl. This thing made it like 51%, 49%. Well, that's not very useful, right? That's not really going to change much at all. And that's, you know, I'm ignoring the ethical implications of that kind of a thing. Just talking about the science of it. Taking a drug to improve your chances of one type of child by 1% isn't really going to do much, right? So that's what they mean about practical implications. Okay. And by all means, if there's questions along the way, throw them out there, and we'll talk about them. Let's see. Let's jump ahead to some actual. Right. Let's move ahead. Okay. Parameters versus a statistic. So a parameter is a numerical measurement describing some characteristic of a population. A statistic is a numerical measurement describing some characteristic of a sample. So already we're seeing two words, big difference, right? You want to be able to recognize those words because you might end up using the wrong tool on a homework problem or real life problem or whatever because you forget the difference between a parameter and a statistic. Very rarely do we end up with a measurement of an entire population. Almost always we end up with a measurement of a sample, right? That's how most statistics is done. Rarely do you ever get to actually measure the entire population. So that difference between population and sample is more important than it may seem at first. Okay, quantitative or numerical data consists of numbers representing counts or measurements. Categorical data, sometimes called qualitative. Those words sound similar. I know I talked a little bit about this last time, but it's super important that you know the difference. Quantitative versus qualitative. So sometimes I will use the word qualitative. Sometimes I use the word categorical. They mean the same thing. So qualitative means the quality of a thing. And in modern times, we kind of think of quality as meaning like, you know, is it junk or is it like really well made? But the word quality, if you sort of go back through the definition, it really just means a characteristic of a thing. Okay, it's not really a judgment on whether something is well made or not well made. It's more like, you know, it could mean all sorts of stuff. What is the color of a shirt? What is the fabric of a shirt? What is, you know, all sorts of things about it. In modern day, we sort of our language is sort of losing a lot of its subtlety as we fight to reduce language down to less and less words and less letters. We're losing a lot of subtleties, so words don't have the meaning they once did. But that's what we mean by qualitative. It's the characteristic of something, the categorical. Whereas quantitative consists of numbers representing counts. Notice they don't just say quantitative data consists of numbers. That's not the whole story. It has to be quantitative data, quantitative. So that's how you can remember. The students get mixed up all the time, but just think a quantity is how much of something, right? That's literally what quantity means. Quantitative data consists of numbers representing counts or measurements. So your age is quantitative. Your height is quantitative. Your telephone number, that's numbers. But what is it counting? What is it measuring? Your telephone number doesn't count or measure anything. It's not quantitative data. You can put telephone numbers into StatCrunch and take the average. We'll stop using that word average because it's actually kind of bad. Mean is what we should be saying. You can put telephone numbers into StatCrunch and find the mean of those telephone numbers, but what good's that going to do you? Not do any good, right? It's pointless. Why would you take the mean of telephone numbers? Because they're not actually counting anything. Social security numbers, school ID numbers, jersey numbers of players on a team. Those don't count anything. So they are not quantitative data, okay? They're numbers, but they are not quantitative. Whenever you have numbers, you have to ask yourself, are these counting something? Are these an age, counting years? Is it a height, counting the measurement of how tall you are? You have to be measuring something to be quantitative. Quantitative, quantity, how much of something. Categorical or qualitative is more like a label or a description. What color are your eyes? That's categorical data. You're either going to go in the brown eye box, the blue eye box, the green eye box, whatever, however many boxes there are. That's categorical. Okay, so that's kind of the easiest way to think about it. Oh yeah, age, that's quantitative. Eye color, that's categorical, and it can kind of help remind you of the difference between the two. Here's another one, categorical data. How about political affiliations, right? We've got a certain number of boxes we can put people in. You're a Democrat, you're a Republican, you're independent, you're undecided, right? We can come up with whatever number of boxes we want to describe people's political affiliations, and then we can put everyone in those boxes. That is not a number representing counts. Not even a number at all, right? So that would be a version of categorical data as well, an example of that. Discrete data versus continuous data. So discrete data is when you have I always think of it as a finite number of boxes. Technically it's countable, and countable can be infinite, but we don't really need to get into that in here. But it's like, what are the number of possibilities, right? So discrete data, your age, technically at any given instant, you're aging, right? But we don't measure age that finely. It's not like when someone asks you how old you are, you go, oh, I'm 32.7453655429 years old, right? No one ever answers the question that way. You're 32, and then when you hit your birthday, you become 33. Your next birthday, you become 34. So see how we're jumping values? Technically, that's discrete data, and there's only a finite number of them. So, you figure what the oldest people get to be, like 120? You got 120 boxes, and everyone fits in one of those 120 boxes, okay? Continuous data is where you have an infinitely many possibilities, and you can kind of think of it this way. If you have two different data values, is it possible to have any two data values you have, is it possible to have a data value in between those two? So like temperature would be considered continuous. We don't always measure it to a high degree of accuracy, but given any two temperatures, can you find another temperature in between those two? Yeah, right? If it's 34.1 degrees or 34.3 degrees, is there a value in the middle? Yeah, 32.2 degrees. Can we find a value in between those now? And you can just keep breaking it down smaller and smaller forever. That's continuous, right? So here's an example. The number of eggs that hens lay are discrete because they represent counts. You can count them. My chicken laid 1 egg today. Or this chicken laid 2 eggs. Or, depending on the breed of chicken that you have, they lay a different number of eggs per day. Those would be discrete. Continuous data. The amounts of milk from cows are continuous data because they are measurements that can assume any value over a continuous span. Okay, your cow might give you 1 gallon of milk one day, and then the next day 1.17 gallons, and then the next day 0.98432 gallons. You see, it can take on an infinite number of different values that it gives you. That's continuous. Right. This you can read about this stuff's pretty straightforward. You can read about that more in the actual problems that you're, on the lessons that are in the homework. I don't want to spend too much time on that because students usually do fine with it. Let's move past that. Critical thinking, that's a big part of statistics, right? A lot of times math students don't like critical thinking because you can't memorize critical thinking, right? People really like to memorize math, which, by the way, is the best way to not really be good at math, is to try to memorize everything. You want to be understanding it. You want to be making conclusions based on critical thinking. And that's challenging because, like I say, you can't memorize critical thinking. You always have to be adapting to a new situation and going, oh, this is a different problem now. And statistics is that way. Every statistics problem you do is different than every statistics problem you've done previously. So you can't memorize stuff, right? If I take two researchers and tell them, go figure out the population or what percentage of Ventura College students support a tobacco ban, those two statisticians are probably going to approach that problem differently, and they're going to make different decisions and different choices, and they're probably going to come up with approximately the same results, but they might have a little bit difference in how they do it, because there is no like one right way to do statistics. Now, sometimes students take that to mean that there's no wrong way to do statistics. There is an infinite number of wrong ways to do statistics, but there's very often more than one quote unquote the right way to do it. Like, you know, in a math class, you know, you hear this from students, just tell me the right way to do it. Well, statistics is one of those subjects where there isn't necessarily the right way to do a problem. There's different ways. What you want to be able to do when you do a statistics problem is be able to defend what you did. Why did you make the choice to do your statistics this way? Oh, I did it because of this, this, and this. Oh, okay, that makes sense. What you don't want is to go, I don't know, I just pushed some buttons in Stat Crunch. I don't even know what's going on. Then obviously that's not critical thinking, right? Right, and then you may have heard some of these before. There's famous quotes about statistics that are actually enlightening a little bit. They can be helpful. Benjamin Disraeli, I forget who that is. There are three kinds of lies: lies, damned lies, and statistics, right? So people will use statistics unethically. Cigarette companies, oil companies have, you know, done this in the extreme, where they, you know, cigarette companies, people ended up dead because they lied about statistics. Oil companies, people have also died, but destroying the climate based on, you know, statistics they put out. So, you know, people will use statistics, and this is one good reason why you need an understanding of statistics, because I think I talked about this before. If you go into a room and you start talking about numbers, math, statistics, people just shrug their shoulders and go, I don't know, this guy sounds like he knows what he's talking about. You don't want to be in that case, because then you're in the case where other people are controlling what you think. Other people are making the decisions that you want to be a part of. You want to be able to tell when your politician is on TV saying something, you go, you know, that's just not right. He's not using statistics correctly. He's using it to make his point, but actually, and I'll say people do this on both sides. I hear politicians all the time on both sides of the aisle, both intentionally and unintentionally using statistics incorrectly, right? Because they don't understand statistics well enough, but they'll throw it out there to convince you of their point of view, to get you to agree with them. And then if you don't know statistics, you're just kind of left to go, yeah, maybe, I don't know. I guess that person sounds smart. I'm just going to go with what they say. But you're giving up a lot of power when you do that. So you want to make sure that you can go, yeah, that's not right what that person's saying. They're using those statistics wrong, right? Let's see. Yeah, we don't need to go through the rest of those, right? But that one was good. A voluntary response sample or self-selected sample is one in which the respondents themselves decide whether to be included. These are not good. You can't have surveys that way, because it could be that the people respond all have something in common, and the people who don't respond all have something in common. And so in that case, what you're doing is you're specifically leaving out a group of people, right? This is why sometimes, like, the one that I find kind of annoying is that every year I forget what group it is. There's a group that I think it's the National Science Foundation. They do a study every year of PhDs and where we're working, right? So I get this, every year I get this letter from the National Science Foundation. They want me to fill out their survey information. And if I don't send it back, they just keep sending me letters. They call me on the phone, emailing, like just trying to get a hold of me, because their statistics aren't valid if they only collect information from the people who respond, right? So for instance, one of the things they find, you might get this on your phone. Sometimes someone calls you and say, we're with Pew Research Institute, and we'd like to ask you some questions about the upcoming political election. Do you have time to answer? And most of us are on our way to work, or on our way to pick up our kids, or going to drive your dad to the hospital or doctors or whatever it is you need to do. And you go, sorry, don't have time. And you hang up, right? Well, you're choosing not to be part of that survey. So who is choosing to be part of the survey? Well, it tends to be a lot of older people who are like retired, because they're not, a lot of retired people aren't in a big rush to get anywhere. They don't have as much to do. So they're like, sure, I got 15 minutes to kill. Give me something interesting to do with my day. Sure, tell me all you want. So what you get in that is you get a lot of surveys from older people. Well, older retired people definitely have a point of view, right? They're varied. I'm not saying they all have the same point of view, but it's a different point of view from those of us who are still working and trying to keep our heads above water in this sort of crazy world we're living in. So you definitely get skewed results, right? So although it may seem like, well, I asked 100 people and 50 of them got back to me, that's still going to affect your data and probably not be representative of the population as a whole. So you want to look out for that. So do not use voluntary response sample data for making conclusions about a population, right? So I just kind of explained why that's not good. Same thing with when you put something on a website. You're already, if you put something on Fox News, you're already selecting for people who are sort of aligned with Fox News line of thinking. But then not every single person who goes on the website is going to respond to the survey. What happens is you get the people who are the most, have the most feeling. Like, oh, this is my chance. Like, here's a survey about Trump. It's on Fox News. And I'm, if you're like super into Trump, you're going to respond to that. If you're, maybe you're on the right, so you go to Fox News once in a while, but you're not like, super in love with Trump, you might not answer the survey. You might go, I don't really care about the survey. It's not a big deal. So a lot of times in those voluntary responses, what you get are people who have very strong feelings one way or the other. And a lot of the people who are in the middle and don't really care about the topic, they're like, I don't know, whatever, I don't really care. They don't respond. Well, that's going to skew your data quite a bit. So you have to be careful about that. Right. Oh, this is a big one. You're gonna hear me talk about a lot, because this is a common mistake that your politicians use against you, news people use against you, sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally. But it is so easy. Our brains want to assign causality when there is none, right? So the difference between correlation, two things being related, and things can be very related, right? We talked about ice cream sales and shark attacks. They are very closely related. But one does not cause the other. Causality means one thing causes the other. Most of the work that we do this semester will not give us the power to say that A causes B. Right? It's going to say, well, A and B are very closely related, and it appears that when we change A, it affects B, and when we change B, it affects A, but that doesn't necessarily mean that one of them is the direct cause of the other. So even when we do work that shows a very high rate of causality, do not make the leap to saying, yeah, so this thing causes this other thing, right? I still see people do that in their videos sometimes. You want to be very careful about that. Correlation does not imply causality, right? That's a very common thing. And you'll hear like politicians do this nonstop. They're like, we conducted this survey and we saw this, and I'm going to connect it to this other event over here, and therefore I'm saying that this causes this. What they're just trying to do is get you to vote for their thing or get your support for their thing, but doesn't necessarily imply the other, right? One time I was listening. I mean, you can literally hear this every day if you just listen to like political radio. Or political news or any of those kind of shows. You'll hear it every single day. You can get an example of this. But sometimes they'll talk about like, oh, well, reading levels at this grade are low. So let's see. I probably don't have time to do that whole example. But you just want to be careful about when they cite a specific thing. Watch for the leap. Go, okay, he or she just stated a statistic. Where's the leap where they're going to a conclusion? And then you want to be really careful about that leap and ask yourself, okay, I think they're taking legitimate statistics, but then they're making a leap to this other conclusion, and I don't know if I agree with their conclusion. And a lot of times what are happening is people are trying to throw causality at you when they should really be throwing correlation at you. And you might go, well, what's the difference? If two things are closely related, well, again, that's like trying to stop shark attacks by banning ice cream sales. Saying, you know what, we've seen that ice cream sales and shark attacks highly, highly correlated to each other. So we're banning ice cream, and then we're not going to see anyone get attacked by sharks. Well, that's absurd, right? That's the kind of, that's an extreme case, but that's the kind of thing you do when you make decisions that are correlation, but you're treating them as causality. You end up making rules or changes that don't have any effect. Just like banning ice cream sales to change shark attacks would have literally no effect at all. That happens in our political system all the time. And it's usually because somebody wants to ban ice cream sales, so they present to you, well, I think that, it's correlated to this other thing. We really need to look out for these people that are being attacked by sharks. Come on, what are you, pro-shark attack? You're out there, you want people to get attacked by sharks? What's going on? You should really support me in banning ice cream sales, right? It's that kind of reasoning that gets out of hand. And then do not use correlation between two variables as a justification for concluding that one of the variables is caused by the other. This is a very, very common way of manipulating people. Reported results. There's a lot, you might, sometimes it's hard to measure people or things. So you might have people report what they do. This is very, very frequently not accurate when you ask people to report their results. So for instance, they give the example here. There was a survey where they asked people, are you going to vote in the upcoming election? 70% of people said they were. 61% of people actually voted in the election. So sometimes what you get when you ask people to report is they start getting feelings. And those feelings sometimes can turn into what they want reality to be rather than what it is. Well, I want to vote in the next. I don't usually vote. This is hypothetical. I always vote in everything. But a hypothetical situation, you have someone who's like, yeah, I don't really vote, but I probably should vote in this next election. All right, I'll put down that I'm going to vote. And then that person ends up not voting, right? So people are aspirational when they self-report things. Weight is a huge one. You cannot conduct a survey where you ask people, what's your weight? For two reasons. There's actually two reasons that come up why that's inaccurate. One is sometimes people have feelings about their weight. Most people have feelings about their weight one way or another. Maybe a little feeling, maybe a big feeling. A lot of people aren't happy with their weight, so they're aspirational. They'll give you a value a little lower than it is, right? 10, 15, 20 pounds lower, because that's where they want to be. That's where they think they're going to be 2 months from now, right? So they kind of report that value. The other thing is people round. When you ask people their weight, the numbers, almost never will someone give you an odd number. When you go out, ask people their weights, almost every number you get is going to be an even number, and more than likely it's going to end in a 0. You will occasionally get numbers that end in a 5. So people will say, I'm 160, I'm 165, I'm 170, I'm 175. Or you get even numbers, I'm 168. No, when you ask someone's weight, they're never going to say, I'm 167. Well, statistically speaking, there are people out there whose weight is 167, but if you ask 100 people their weight, you're probably not going to see 167 on that list. So people do a few things. They round to the nearest value, oftentimes to the nearest 0 or 5. And then, except for numbers that end in 5, they're not going to give you odd numbers. People don't say, I'm 161. They're going to say, I'm 160, right? So those values are not super reliable. So self-reported results, not great. That's why a good result, if you can do this, if you're trying to conduct a survey where you need people's weight, you have them come in and you, as a doctor, you weigh them. You watch them as they weigh in, you record the value, and then there's no weirdness or emotions entering into it. It's just it's a factual calculation. You're standing on the scale, it says a number, I'm writing that number down, right? Small samples. This is a big one, right? Your samples don't generally need to be enormous, but they can't be tiny either. And this is hard with teaching. Like we're doing a project right now, a bunch of us, there's like 8 of us in the math department working on a project, and we're trying to change the way that we do testing. And next semester, we're going to get 2 classes, one where we use the new method, one where we use the old method, and we're going to compare. But the reality is most of what we do will not be statistically sound because that's a sample size of 2. A sample size of 2 is absurd. The only way you can do worse is a sample size of 1, right? Sample sizes of 1 are called anecdotal. And you will hear people use this all the time, especially like right now you hear a ton of this related to COVID and all sorts of stuff. People will ignore samples that involve hundreds of thousands of people because their cousin had something happen to him. Well, your cousin is a sample size of 1. What happened to your cousin is irrelevant. The scientifically sound thing is what happened in the 100,000 person survey, right? That's what we want to look at because that's what's by and large the behavior that's going to be happening. When you look at one individual person, well, my cousin was unvaccinated and got sick and it wasn't even a big deal. He was fine. Okay, well, I'm glad for your cousin that your cousin's fine, but that's one person, right? We're watching hundreds of thousands of people die so far in the last few years. You have to look at those large numbers. Those large samples are the ones that are, scientific. On an individual scale, the world is full of weird occurrences, right? We've all had stuff happen to us where it was like a weird thing, and you're like, wow, that was very unlikely that occurred like that. But, that's how probability works. We'll do a chapter on probability, and you'll see very unlikely events do happen on occasion, right? You can't use those unlikely events as your guide. You have to use the large sample sizes as your guide because that's like the typical normal behavior. So we don't want very small sample sizes. You want them big. They don't have to be monstrous, right? We don't if we have 10,000 VC students, we don't have to have a sample size of 5,000 people, but you want it to be more than 30 or something. You want it to be big enough that you're actually getting something, and that's part of what we'll look at is sample. Like, how do you know if your sample size is big enough? We'll have some calculations that say, well, what margin of error do you want? When you see these polls online, margin of error of 3%. Well, how many people do I have to survey to get a margin of error of 3%? Those are calculations that you'll learn along the way, but you want to understand the implications of a large versus a small sample size. Okay, thanks, Thade. I got you. Where are you on here? There you go. Gotcha. Okay. Percentages. If you have trouble with percentages, just make sure you kind of brush up on that. We'll be using them from time to time. You can easily look up a video just to remind yourself how those work. We kind of talked about this last time, right? The example I gave is a pretty famous example now. It's a more recent one of the same exact survey. They asked people, do you support the Affordable Care Act? And then later they asked you, do you support Obamacare? The Affordable Care Act is the official name of Obamacare, but very different answers. very different responses because people didn't understand that those are actually the same thing. They're just, their politics have guided them in a way to answer certain ways. So you have to be careful with your wording of questions. So for here is two questions that were asked. Should the president have line item veto to eliminate waste? 97% of people say yes. Should the president have line item veto or not? Only 57% of people say yes. So see that to eliminate waste, that extra sort of coloring that you're putting on the question is going to affect how people feel about it. People don't like waste. No one likes waste. Even if you're pro-government, people don't like waste. Like, people who are anti-government will rail against waste. But even if you're pro-government, you're not like, yeah, I think the government should just be wasting my money. No one wants that. So when you say to eliminate waste, everyone's going to go, yeah, let's get rid of waste. That's a good idea. Even if I like that the government should be helping its people, I still don't want there to be waste, right? So you're throwing emotions into that question to get people to answer a certain way. So you have to be careful about that. That's another way in which if the person conducting the survey wants a specific outcome, well, then you flavor the question a little bit and you're going to get a specific outcome. Right? Another example they put out there. Too little money is being spent on welfare, or too little money is being spent on assistance to the poor. You ask that question, you're going to get very different results because some people, as soon as they hear the word welfare, boom, I'm against it. Like, they're not even going to listen to the rest of the sentence. You said welfare? No. Right? But if you say the same thing in a different way, assistance to the poor, you go, oh, yeah, I'm supposed to kind of care about poor people a little bit. So, yeah, let's be in support of that. Right? But it's the same question. It's just asked in a different way. To make it more complicated, even the order that you ask questions can affect it. They've done this where they take the same survey questions and they randomize it into like 5 different orders, and then they give 1,000 people, so 200 people each get a different version. Your outcomes are going to vary a lot depending on the order, which this one always kind of bums me out because, like, well, how on earth are we supposed to write a good survey if I even have to figure out the order that I'm going to ask these questions? Yeah, it's tricky. You just got to do your best. That's why there's no quote unquote the right way to do statistics. You do your best. You try to think things out. You try to make really good decisions, and you try to eliminate things, but you can never do the perfect statistics, right? Even what is it, 5? Now I can't remember what the number is, but Nate Silver, the guy who got pretty famous a few years ago with his statistics, still got some statistics wrong in some pretty famous places. So you can't be perfect with statistics. You just do the best you can. Non-responses, we kind of talked about that. Missing data. What do you do when you're missing data? There's a tendency to want to fill it in. Go, well, I think I know what this person was going to say. You can't do that. That's unethical. All sorts of reasons you might have missing data, but a lot of times the data you're missing might be for specific reasons, right? It might be mechanical reasons. So you might be collecting temperature data. So you have a weather station and it's collecting data all the time. Well, maybe it's next to something that gets really, really hot. And when your temperature data, when that sensor gets too hot, it shuts down. So it may be during really, really hot periods, you're missing data. So think about that. You're trying to do temperature data, but whenever the temperature goes above, say, 108, you don't get that data anymore because your weather station shuts down. Well, that's really going to mess up your results because you're missing all the highest data. So when you crunch your numbers, you're going to think that the temperatures are much lower than they actually are because you're missing the highest values, right? So many reasons why you can do this. So missing data you have to be very careful with. You generally can't fill in the gaps for missing data. So you want to make really sure that you're you're not going to miss data in the first place, because it's really hard to make up for it later. You usually can't, right? The connection between precision and accuracy. When people see a number that looks very specific, very precise, they oftentimes think that it means it's accurate. I see this all the time when students have a calculator and they put in a number and it comes out with a bunch of decimals. They instantly put their faith in that number. They're like, well, that must be right. Look how exact it is. It's like got all those numbers after the decimal point. Man, this must be really good mathematics going on. Not necessarily. It just means that it's a very precise number. Precision means that you're like to a high degree of like 4 versus 4.13579. That second number is very precise. It's sort of going to a finer degree of measurement. But that doesn't mean it's accurate, right? So don't confuse precision and accuracy. They're not necessarily the same thing. And then you have deliberate distortions. That's unethical use of statistics. You don't want to do that. You want to use statistics in a way that is, you don't want to be misleading people. You don't want to be unethical. Let's see. We kind of talked about that already. Excuse me. All right, yeah, we got a little more time. Observational study versus experiment. These are important to know the difference because we treat them differently. In an observational study, we observe and measure specific characteristics, but we don't attempt to modify the subjects being studied. So basically, you can loosely think of this as, did you intervene and change what was happening, or did you just observe what was happening? So, for instance, I talked earlier about the talk I went to where the guy was talking about the yellow light cameras around town and how it's very clear from his statistical work that the red light cameras, those corresponding lights had shorter yellow light times, whereas the ones that were not being watched by red light cameras had like an extra half second or extra second to the yellow light to it. That was an observational study. When he went out and made his measurements, the lights didn't change based on him being there, right? It's not like the yellow light said, oh, that one guy's watching me and timing me. I better be on an extra half second. That's ridiculous, right? So that's an observational study. That guy went around town and he just watched what was happening, but nothing changed because of his observations. That is an observational study. Nothing was modified by the work that he did. Okay. In an experiment, we apply some treatment and then proceed to observe its effects on the subjects. Subjects in the experiments are called experimental units. So an example would be vaccine studies. Okay, you can't do a vaccine study without giving some people the vaccine. So you're making a change, right? So you got a brand new vaccine. You want to know if it works. What you're probably going to do is I'll make up a number, 1,000 people. You split them into two groups, each one that's 500 people. The first group, you give them the vaccine. The second group, you give them a saline solution or whatever, right, a placebo, so they think they're getting the vaccine. And then you see, is there a difference between these two? Oh, in the second group, this many people got COVID, and in the first group, 5% of that number got COVID. And then you can tell a difference. That was an experiment because you gave the people in the first group a vaccine. You changed that person. You changed the event. So the thing that you were doing, you took action that changed how something worked, right? So that's the difference between an observational study and an experiment. Are you changing something? Are you taking action that makes a change, or are you just watching what happens? Okay. So here's an experiment. In the largest public health experiment ever conducted, 2,745 children were given a treatment consisting of the Salk vaccine. That's the polio one, I think, if I remember correctly. while 201,229 other children were given the placebo. The Salk vaccine injections constitute a treatment that modified the subjects because some of them were given, you changed them by giving them a vaccine, right? Here's one of the most important things in the course, a simple random sample, right? You should almost always, you're going to have to argue that what you're studying is a simple random sample. So a simple random sample of n subjects is selected in such a way that every possible sample of the same size n has the same chance of being chosen. So you don't get to pick and choose, right? Because imagine I'm a doctor and I want to know, I have a new idea for treating people's high blood pressure. So I'm going to conduct an experiment, okay, and I choose, okay, these are the people I'm going to put in the group that I'm going to give this different procedure to, and I've chosen these people for the second group. Well, whether it's conscious or unconscious, as a doctor, I'm probably going to put people in the first group. Even if this is unconscious, I'm going to put people in the first group that I think are going to respond better to my treatment, and the people I think aren't going to respond, I'm going to put in the second group. So you have to be very careful when you do that thing. You want to be randomizing it. I take all my patients, I write a computer program that randomly puts them in group 1 or group 2, and then my biases didn't get in there, right? Bias is another one of those politically charged words right now. It's kind of hard to, some people, it's hard to have a conversation about. We all have biases. We all have all sorts of biases. And the truth is, if you're working on something, you probably care. If you work on vaccines, you probably believe in vaccines. You probably are interested in helping people, and you want to increase safety. And if you have a belief that this vaccine is going to be successful, that's great, but you don't want that bias to affect the outcome. And by randomizing who you put in which group, then you can't, your bias didn't, even if it's unconscious, you may have the best, you really want to do the best work and you really want to do great work. Those biases can sneak into things without you even realizing it. So if you randomize who goes into what group, there's no bias, right? You didn't put someone in one group because, you thought they were going to respond better to treatment. The computer did it. And so your personal bias did not work its way in there, right? Throughout this book, we will use various statistical procedures, and we often have a requirement that we have collected a simple random sample as defined above. You're going to read that probably hundreds of times in the next 18 weeks, is something in a problem will, when you look in the book for a procedure, it's going to say, if you have a simple random sample, then you can do the following. And what that's saying is, if you don't have a simple random sample, you can't use this tool. That's how important simple random samples are. Is you pretty much always need to have them if you can justify it, right? In a random sample, members from the population are selected in such a way that each individual member in the population has an equal chance of being selected. A probability sample involves selecting members from a population in such a way that each member of a population has a known, but not necessarily the same, chance of being selected. You usually don't want it to. You usually want this random sample. You want to be able to justify that it's a random sample in some way. We'll go a few more minutes. In systematic sampling, we select some starting point and then select every kth element in the population. It's not as good. There are instances where you kind of have to do sampling this way, but it's not preferred. Convenience sampling, we simply use results that are very easy to get. It's like an internet poll. They're also useless. So the more convenient a sample is to obtain, the less validity that it probably has. Okay. And then you'll see when you do the lessons, there's stratified sampling and cluster sampling and these different types of sampling, multi-stage sampling. They're not super complicated. They're just different versions of how do you create a sample and then ask those people what they want, or how do you get your data, right? So there's all sorts of this kind of stuff. You should be able to understand that pretty well from the lessons that we're looking at. And then let's see how many pages are left here. Is it almost done? No. Okay. It's more than a few minutes, and I'm supposed to cut things off at 90 minutes for the till we're back in the classroom. So let's stop here. I'll stop off on page 28, and then we'll sort of pick up here later. So feel free to work on the homework. Don't restrict yourself to the homework that I've necessarily talked about. Some of these things, the lessons are very good. You're oftentimes going to be able to go through and complete those before I've even talked about it. And oftentimes that can actually be really helpful, because then you'll go, oh yeah, I was a little confused when I did the homework, but now that you're talking about it, it makes even more sense. It kind of primes you for the discussion that we're going to have. So I highly encourage you to work on the homework whenever you can. Do not wait for those due dates. You'll be working a little bit behind if you do that. So please do that. And then Colin V, stick around, or if you could jump into Zoom, Colin. I'm having an issue with the roll. So I need you to hop in there and talk to me so I can make sure that we have our records correct for the roll. So Colin V, if you could do that, please. And then everyone else, thank you. And anyone else who wasn't here for when I did roll, please come into the Zoom meeting and talk to me so that I can make sure that my roll is accurate, because I have to drop people based on this roll. And if you go, no, I was actually there in class, if I have you marked as absent, enough times, you're going to get dropped from the course. So so make sure that we're squaring that away. Okay. So thanks, everybody. Make sure that you're getting your homework set up with the licenses. Make sure you're starting the homework and working on that. Other than that, we'll move forward. I'm going to shut down the YouTube stream, but then I'm going to stick around for anyone who is in Zoom can stick around and ask me questions, and I will talk to you as long as you have questions, okay? So thanks, everybody, and I will see you next week. Look for that email from the school about the extension of online classes. Okay, thanks.